Good afternoon and welcome to today's webinar. Please type, my name is Helen Hall and I am one of IEEE USA's webinar coordinators. Please type your questions in the chat pod and the presenter will answer them at the end of the presentation. Our presenter today is Ann Herman Nady. Ann, you may start the webinar now.
Hello, welcome to this hour on a topic that I have quite a bit of energy and excitement as well as experience with, which is this topic of creativity and innovation. I will be asking you to engage with me in our hour to make this as interactive as possible. And you will have access to many of the key models and handouts after the webinar as part of the package that you get with IEEE. So let's get started. A few ground rules. We have a few ground rules, but not as many as you might see in the sign here. I encourage you to engage your brain and participate. I'll be asking you to raise your hand, to agree, disagree. If you've not used Adobe Connect before, you'll see that there's a little, down in the lower left-hand corner, you'll see sort of a little person with their hand up with an arrow next to that, and that's going to allow you to make those selections. I will also ask you to type into the chat pod, which is where you're seeing things like my welcome greeting that just appeared. So if you would participate, that would be great. I just saw my slide go backwards, so hopefully that won't happen. Turn off your email, cell phones, any distractions. Be patient with your questions and jot down any insights and ideas. I would recommend that you actually, because we'll be using the chat pod quite a bit, jot down any questions you have, and then at the very end, we'll be typing them and responding to them. That way we won't have to scroll back through a lot of chat to capture those. Okay, let's get started. I do have an agenda for our time. This is a topic we could spend many hours on, but I'd like to spend a little bit of time looking at what is creative thinking, the mechanics of how we think. We'll do a little bit of brain stuff so that you can understand that. We'll talk about whole brain creativity and innovation, which is a topic and a set of models and tools that you'll walk away with in the toolkit that we're providing. So lots to share with you today, both on the theoretical and research side as well as on the practical side. So let's get started. Why is this a relevant topic today? It's interesting, having been in this field now for over 20 years. The interest in creative thinking and innovation kind of comes and goes with time. In the last year or so, suddenly there has been this surge of interest again in creative thinking and innovation. And I think it's because we're dealing with change. Raise your hand if you would, if you are experiencing more change in recent years than you've experienced perhaps in previous times. So if you would go to that, it's just raise your hand, and if you're experiencing quite a bit of change, and I see many of you are raising your hands to say yes, you're experiencing change. Great. Gives me a chance to see that and also see, and you can practice kind of using this little pod to raise your hand. And so as we look at this notion of change, you can define it in different ways. I thought it would be useful to look it up in the dictionary and say, okay, let's see what this thing means. You could say, well, it means to make or become different. And that's an inherent part of the creative process. So change is definitely a core element in creativity. So that's the good news about change. When we look at another definition, it's to replace with another. Not a big surprise there. But I found the third definition pretty interesting, and that one is to put fresh clothes on. So we can certainly look at change as being something that's irritating, distracting, but there are some things that we know. You can look at it positively and know that it is a critical and inherent part of creative thinking and innovation. So it can be very useful to you if you're looking at creating some new thinking and new ways of doing things. So perhaps some fresh perspective on that. Another thing that's happening is speed. Now, of course, I'm on the highway quite a bit. Here I am driving perhaps a little bit of the speed limit, but all of us are moving at a pace that is so far beyond what it is that we had ever experienced before. And it's creating a situation for many of us where we're not even sure what it is that we're going to be focusing on, even in the short term. I thought this cartoon captured that pretty well. So, Jim, where do you see yourself in 10 minutes? So feel free to laugh if you'd like. You do have a little laughter key on that hand raising function. So I'll be sharing lots of cartoons. Hopefully you can laugh along with me at some of my favorites. So that, that is part of what we're dealing with. And I think that's making it harder for us to deal with the status quo, accept the status quo. So let's talk a little bit about what creativity is. And here's an example. You might say, well, gee, is this creative? This is a kind of an interesting display of a dog doing some things that you might not expect a dog to do. And sometimes we talk about thinking outside of the box or inside of the box. And of course, this sometimes we feel that that's not appropriate, as this person says, never, ever think outside the box. But I believe we're getting called on more and more to look at how we can shift our frame of thinking. And it's difficult to know what that means, think outside the box, if you don't have the box defined. So what's very important in this whole domain of defining creativity is to understand what that is for you, what is different for you, and what's the norm. And that's going to be pretty unique to each individual out there. Another way of looking at this is to challenge our assumptions about what creativity is. So if you would, take a look at the photograph on the screen and type into chat, if you would, what problem we're solving with this little potato. What problem are we solving? We're actually solving a problem here. So type into chat, what problem are we actually solving? Anybody have an idea? Carl, yes, we've got a broken light bulb that we're unscrewing. Absolutely, absolutely. Removing a light bulb. Perhaps we could be cooking a potato. That's certainly could be one option. And as we look at that notion of, does this qualify as something creative? If you agree, just go to that little person raising their hand and click the agree button. If you would, does this qualify? Is this actually a creative solution? What do you think? Yeah, you could be using the potato to generate electricity, because we do know that that the potatoes do conduct electricity. Biodegradable solution to the energy crisis. Great. A totally different set of eyes. So absolutely, I believe that this does. Many of you agree that this is actually a creative solution. So I grew up in a family of creative people. You can see behind me some paintings. These were my father's paintings. Both of my sisters were artists. And you can define creativity beyond the reach of what you're capable of. And so one of the things that's very important is to redefine what it is that we're talking about above and beyond the sort of Sistine Chapel level of creativity. Creativity is really about finding new ways to solve some of those key challenges and issues that we face every day. So I encourage you to be thinking about how your definition of creativity may be either enhancing your ability to think creatively, or your perception of others' creativity, and how you might perhaps modify that. So just putting that out there as a way to begin to look at that definition. Here's an example. Is this creative? What do you think? So here's an example of somebody who, where we needed to actually get the fire hose through the vehicle, and so that's kind of a creative solution, perhaps. And then, of course, if we have any golfers in the crowd, I don't know if we do, but as a golfer, I think this would certainly be a creative solution for me. Thank goodness for Photoshop, right? So I think let's look at defining creativity in new ways. And I think one of the most important takeaways from today will be looking at your own mental framework around what creativity is and whether or not you have access to that. I had to shift my thinking as the daughter of an artist and many artists in my family to say, creativity is not just the ability to draw. So that's something that we'll talk a little bit further about as we get into this. I'd like to ask you, and type into chat, if you would, what you think is most important to successful creative thinking and innovation. So I need you to pick one and type the letter A, B, C, or D into chat based on your answer. Is it getting solutions to tough problems? Is that the most important thing? Is it making ideas actually happen? Doing something with the ideas? Is it getting the best thinking out of everybody available? Or is it out of the box new thinking for the future? So go ahead and type in what your perspective is, and type in the letter, if you would, A, B, C, or D, based on your selection. And as you can see, as people are typing this in, that we've got all of them represented, A, B, C, and D. So many of you are looking at this differently. Okay, and A and D, quite a bit of those, B and C. So as you look at that, you'll find that, again, we're all looking at creativity in different perspectives. So as you work with colleagues, as you work with your boss, as you work with your families, note that what they think is most important may be quite different than what is most important for you. And of course, all of these four are important. I encourage you to jot down the letter and the color of your selection. So if it was A, it's blue, B, it's green, C, it's red, and D, yellow. And we'll come back to that in a few moments as we talk about the model we'll be working. Another thing that's important that I think as we look at this definition of creativity and innovation is understanding, gee, what's involved with each. And I found, over the years that one of the biggest challenges with creative thinking is the perceived risk associated with it. And, when we talk about continuous improvement, I'm sure many of you are familiar with this notion of continuous improvement, which is making incremental changes in a given situation. That is typically the least risky of the processes, and it's the least different from the norm of today. Innovation is often interpreted to be a leap beyond continuous improvement, but it's making something that exists today better. And that's lots of people will interpret that term in different ways, but in very general terms, that's often how it is defined. And then finally, creativity is often that leap once beyond that innovation stage, which is to say we're really inventing something new. And that has associated with it inherent risk. And of course, it's much more different from the norm. So as we look at this idea of engaging and becoming more creative and innovative, look at your risk tolerance and those that you work with. How comfortable are they with risk? The greater the challenge, the greater the fear of risk might become a barrier. And if you're looking for real creativity, you have to create safety around that risk so that people will feel comfortable moving out beyond that initial comfort. Okay? And, as you think about that, you could even move continuous improvement, as I see here in chat, over to the left even further. Sometimes continuous improvement is just a tiny little incremental shift of difference. So as we look at that, one of the core components of creative thinking is ideas. And I'd like to take a few moments to just talk about you and your ideas. So I'd like you to think about when and where you are when you get your best ideas. What are you doing? What time of day is it? If you would, go to chat and type in, when do those ideas just pop into your head? The things that kind of often may come out of nowhere. What are you doing? Is it a specific time of day? Is it a certain kind of activity? Yes, early in the shower, early in the morning. Some of you are saying, gee, when you're biking, when you're relaxing. Often it can be early to mid-morning, any time of day, any other kinds of activities where ideas just pop out of nowhere. Yes, when you're doing yard work, often when you're doing other projects. Yes, and for many people, it's late at night when you're very, very quiet, when you're in discussions with other people, when you're seizing upon something that's really interesting. Sometimes it's very early in the morning or very late at night. And any people get it while they're driving, just type in a Y if in the chat if you're a person. I get a lot of my ideas when I'm driving on my way to work, and you might even have forgotten the last few miles, right? You can't write it down. That's the problem when you're running. Yes, obviously when you're running, I know some people who do all of their thinking on their run, and if they can't get their run done, they feel like they've really missed a big opportunity. So I heard one of the first ones, which was in the shower. Of course, this is where Earl gets his ideas, and obviously a challenge with this is that we can't write things down in the shower. Often when we're running, that's a bit of a challenge. You have only 10 seconds of memory when you're in this state where you're getting lots of ideas. And interestingly enough, when we look at many, many, many thousands of people who've answered this question, the same responses often come back again and again and again. when you're driving, when you're running, jogging, exercising, or it could be out, things like where you're working out in the yard, etc. Waking and sleeping, talking with others, in the shower. Why is this? Why would it be that we would have this consistent response across time, across the world, as a matter of fact? And that is because we're in different brain states. And so, now hopefully you're in beta right now. I'm in beta. I'm very alert. And so that's a brain state where oftentimes we may get that as we're discussing things with other people. Alpha is more of a relaxed state. And for many of us, it's when we're beginning to go to sleep or waking up in the morning or maybe relaxing, listening to music, that we get our ideas there. Theta is often that state that we drop into just as we're going to sleep. It often feels like the zone that we're in when we're running. Often when we're driving, we may feel that we're in that theta state where you kind of lose track of time. And then, of course, delta is deep dreamless sleep. Hopefully none of you are in delta right now. So we're going to open a poll. Where are you at this very moment? Are you in beta? Are you alert? Alpha, more relaxed? Theta, more free flow, where you might be daydreaming? Or delta, asleep? And I'm going to ask Helen to launch the poll for us, if we would. So just let's do a quick check with everybody. Where are you right now? What brain state are you in right now? Hopefully none of you will select delta. Okay, so we've got a sense of most of you feel like you're in beta, and some of you are in alpha. There you go. Absolutely. And you may find that you drift off into theta during our time together, so we can go ahead and close the poll. There you go, about half and half between the two. Thank you very much, Helen. Now we can move that off the screen. Thank you. So as we look at that, pay attention to your brain state. You do have a challenge of only 10 seconds of memory, sometimes 15, when you're in that brain state. Some of your best thinking will occur in that state. So you need to capture your ideas if you're not going to lose them. So what are some techniques that you use to capture some of those great ideas? Just go ahead and type those into chat if you would. What are some things that you do? I know I often call myself on voicemail. I will leave myself a voicemail. And it's actually kind of funny because I'll find myself saying to myself, oh, hi, how are you? Here's an idea, and I'll leave it in my voicemail. Some of you will write it down, and if you can write it down safely, that's a great idea. Send yourself an email. Hey, have a pocket voice recorder. That's a great idea. Use an MP3 to record it. Write down, have a recorder function on your phone. I heard of a new app on the iPhone called Dragon, Naturally Speaking, where you can actually record and have it emailed to you or captured automatically into text. I have a piece of paper next to your bed. Did you wake up in the middle of the night with that aha? And this can be the source of a lot of thinking that is uncensored, very, very, very high quality thinking. You may have to have a leap of faith, however, because it may not appear to be obvious to you. I know we were working with some engineers at DuPont some years ago, and one of the things that they were working on some collapsing hoses in the plant. They could not solve the problem. One of the guys in the plant went home, fell asleep, dreamt of a slinky, and couldn't figure out why he was dreaming of a slinky. He wrote it down, woke up the next morning on his way to the plant. Suddenly he said, oh my gosh, I can put a coil into those hoses and they will no longer collapse. So it's not always obvious what the solution is. You have to be very careful and really have this leap of faith that says everyone is born a genius, but the process of living de-geniuses them. That may mean that throughout the course of our lives, we no longer have the faith in those ideas that we have so naturally. So pay attention, write it down. It will move it into long-term memory. And if you can't write it down, you're in the shower, you might create a metaphor, an image of that. Say it out loud. Yeah, that's the minimum thing that you can do, and your brain will capture it. Another thing that's important is to keep in mind that we have a myth of the big idea. And some of us don't pay attention to this because we don't think this is a big idea. This kind of comes back to that Sistine Chapel stuff I was talking about earlier. And there's some fascinating research that looks at the fact that, big ideas really are very rare and are often, available to only a select few. This is what we say to ourselves, really that's a myth. Not true. They're actually available to many more of us. Small ideas are definitely available to everyone. And what's interesting is that small ideas tend to stay proprietary because they're much harder to copy. So the value of a small idea may actually be greater than the value of a big idea. So if you hold back in terms of your thinking about what a creative solution is, because it has to be a big idea, because that's what truly has value, absolutely not. There's a great book called Ideas Are Free that you can check out that is a very useful way to look at how do you capture and manage those small ideas. So one of the things that we know from our 30 years of research is that the brain is the source of creative thinking and innovation. Seems kind of obvious, but when you look at all of the plethora of information about the brain that's out there today, you'll find that that we're learning about the brain every single hour that goes by. And this research, the research that I'll be referring to, was actually started by my dad, who was at General Electric. He's a physicist by training, and he knew that the source of creativity had to be explained by something that was happening in our head. And so he was looking to say, is this something we could teach? And how do we understand where it actually comes from? So his research into the brain has helped us begin to understand how the brain's technology works. And I'm going to spend a few quick minutes giving you an insight to some of that brain technology. First of all, the number of estimated interconnections and patterns, the 10 billion individual neurons of one brain, is a huge number, 10 to the 799th power. So this is not a question of whether we've got it or we don't have it. We've got it. The question is, how are we using it? Now, one of the things that we do know is that the brain is constantly seeking patterns. And let's take a look at that notion of pattern seeking. So can you see a triangle on the screen? So you'll see this flashing in and out. So how many of you, raise your hand if you actually see a white triangle appear after those little circles that were framing it disappear. So can you actually see a white triangle even though it's actually not there once those disappear? Absolutely. So you actually see it. So your brain can pick up a pattern right away and it fills in the blanks. So that's the good news. We're pretty good at patterning. And here's a great way that helps us. So just very quickly do a quick read and see if can you actually read this on the screen. So I'll give you a moment to do that while I take a sip of water. Okay. Pretty amazing, huh? So we're able to do that because our brain does fill in the blanks. It recognizes the patterns. This is maybe something that you saw on the internet some years ago. The reason we can do it is because our brain is such a good pattern recognition machine. Now, so we've established that. Here's another example. So what does this say? Good times are here, right? Everybody can see that? Does everybody know? Yeah, raise your hand. Is that pretty obvious to everybody? Good times are here? Yeah, absolutely. So you all agree with me. No question there. So let's see what this, once you remove that. A little bit of a surprise here. So no tricks. Let me just show you, covering that up. All right. So you see how the brain can fill in the blanks. And the challenge as we look at creative thinking is that our brain's patterning will often fill in the blanks in ways because of our previous experience where we say, well, we know what that says. And we actually may be filling in the blanks in a way that is not necessarily the best way or a new way. And looking a bit further. So when we look at that, overcoming that patterning can be a bit of a challenge. I'd like to see if we could do a quick little activity to just practice this a little bit. So I'm going to have you very quickly just say to yourself out loud these words. Just go down the list very quickly. I'll give you a chance to do that. Just go on down the list. Problem. Now that should be pretty easy, right? Okay, no problem. Now I'm going to ask you to do that again. But what I'd like you to do is I'd like you to say the color of the word, not the word itself. So I'm going to ask you to say the color of the word, and I want you to pay attention to when you kind of get stuck. So I want you to do this as quickly as possible. So starting at the top, what is the color of the word, not the word itself? So how easy was that? Okay, so did you find yourself getting stuck? A lot of people get stuck right around here. They start finding themselves saying the word yellow instead of blue, right? Well, let's see if we can make it even more interesting. Let's see if turning it upside down makes it easier. So let's just try this one. So let's see if this is any different. So I want you, if you would, to start at the top and go ahead and go down the list and see if you can, if this makes it any easier, right? All right, raise your hand if that was easier. Was that a little easier for you when we flip the word around? Now, some people say to me, you know what, Ann, I still was reading the words. My brain is so good at this. It was still picking up and I still found it difficult. So one final last try, you might find this is really easy. Now, just to show that you can do this very quickly, go ahead and go down this list very quickly, and you'll see that you should be able to do this quite easily, right? So part of what we need to do is unhook the patterning of our brain. And that may mean shifting it to a different perspective, taking it away from something that's normal. Pay attention to when you see that patterning happening. When you're listening to an idea or when you're solving a problem, do you find yourself always going to what you've seen before? Lots of times that's where we go. The good news about that is we've got lots of experience. The challenge is we may find ourselves trapped in thinking that's old thinking. Now, what we do know from current brain research is that we are able to create new connections in neurons. Something they call neurogenesis is possible. And, you know, neurons that fire together wire together. That's what a lot of neuroscientists like to say. And that means that old dogs can learn new tricks. So there's no excuse here for anybody. We all can do this, but it does require mental effort to do that. So as we look at this, I'd like you to raise your hand, if you would, if you exercise regularly. This is something else that we know is very related, strongly related to creative thinking. So raise your hand if you're a person who does a lot of exercises, or type in yes. Very good. Okay, so here's the good news. Another reason to feel guilty if you're not a person who exercises regularly, we know that there's a direct correlation between creativity and exercise. There's a dramatic improvement immediately after you've been exercising. The increase is still dramatic 2 hours later, and it's even greater if you're in good shape. So if you are looking to shift your thinking, get moving. And it gets blood flow to the brain, but it also helps us. And many of you were talking about getting great ideas when you were running. Not a big surprise. And then finally, sleep well, create well. Sleep is an important factor. And how, you know, all of us say, gee, let me sleep on it. There's a good reason why. We say that we're going to sleep on it because our brains are in the process of restructuring. And some really interesting research out of the University of Lübeck in Germany has shown that you get a really enhanced set of problem-solving ideas after you've slept on something. When they looked at students who worked on a problem during the day and after they'd studied it, and others who slept on it. So when you have an option, use that sleep on it, and of course have something to capture that thinking so that you can really take advantage of the ideas that you generate, even if it feels like a crazy slinky. All right, let's do some quick mental floss here, if we could. I'd like you, if you would, to see if you can find the number that's to the right of a dot, above a star, below a D, and to the left of a P. To do that. See if you can do that. As soon as you found it, just type in yes or raise your hand. Okay, got a few people finding it here. Pretty tough, huh? Pretty tough. All right, so let me show you where that is. Okay, there it is. Okay. All right, now I'm going to have you do the same exercise, but I'm going to ask the question differently. I'm going to ask the question differently. Let me ask it to you this way. Find the picture below and the big picture to the right. So let me see if you could do that. So raise your hand or type in yes as soon as you found the solution to this one. Let's see if it's any different. Wow, see, everybody, boy, you are just all finding it very fast. So you see how much more quickly you were able to find that. So a lot of what our brain is subject to is how we are asking the question. Your visual processing is up to 4 times faster. And so when you're looking at, you know, lots of times visual processing is very, very helpful to the creative process because we can move so much more quickly. But also pay attention to how you're actually posing the problem. You may be making it harder to solve rather than easier to solve. So we'll talk a little bit more about how you define the problem and some ways to get around that. So here is the answer, of course. Many of you found that already. Okay, so let's talk about mindset, because we're going to talk a little bit about this notion of whole brain thinking and this idea of mindset being a set of beliefs or a way of thinking that determines your behavior, outlook, and mental attitude. So here's an example of mindsets. I was lucky enough to travel down under to Australia, where I was given a gift, a parting gift. Here is a map of the world as we might typically see it. The gift that they gave me was this map, and if you can see this on the screen, you note that Australia is in a very different place. And I was told by my friends down under that my view of the world, my mindset about where Australia is in the world, is very different than their mindset. So interestingly enough, our perception becomes our reality. So what is it that you see in this picture? Just type in quickly. What do you see? What do you see on the screen here? What does this picture say to you? Just very quickly type in, what are you seeing here on the screen? Okay, so we see a man who's walking, maybe brooding a little bit, you know, caved over a little bit, walking in the shadows. Okay, and you might be making some assumptions about kind of what's going on with this man. We complete the picture, we see that there's another part to the story. So I'm going to invite you, if you do nothing else today, is to begin to pay attention to your mindset about what creativity is, about what a good idea is or isn't, about what is available as an option. That is the biggest challenge and the hugest opportunity that you have as you look at this issue of creativity. Now, my dad's initial research was looking at an understanding of brain specialization, this idea of left brain, right brain. And of course, the old adage was the left brain was more logical, analytical, and the right brain was more creative. We've, of course, found, that we say, well, this is a car for the right side of your brain, and this is a car for the left side of your brain. So all the details and data are for the left, and the thrilling drive is for the right. And we look at that, and we know that it's much more complex than that. It's not a question of left brain or left paw dominance or right paw or brain dominance. It's really an and, not an or. So we all have access to all of these different thinking modes. And we have something called the whole brain thinking model, which will be a deck that I'll send you a copy of as part of this follow-up to this presentation. And you see that it has a left and a right, but it also has an upper and a lower. And let me give you another view of this so that you can see it perhaps a little bit differently. But before I do that, I know that I've done quite a bit of work with engineers, and MIT is actually using this model as part of their undergraduate engineering training. And I had an engineering professor say to me, I finally understand what the whole brain model is. And I said, no kidding. Charles, what is it? And he said, it's a first order engineering approximation to mental diversity. Now, that was the first time I had ever thought of it that way, but that may make some sense to some of you, so I thought I would share it with you. Now, the whole brain thinking model, here's a metaphoric picture of it, and you'll see that it's got things like logic, statistics, numbers, equations in the upper left blue, structure, plans, details, and sort of step-by-step timing processes in the lower left green, feelings, people, music in the lower right red, and big picture, more artistic endeavors in the upper right yellow. And you see that there are all sorts of interconnections, and you also note that there is a traffic signal in there. So if I blow that up, I'd like you to think about, in preparing for this, I was talking to the team and I said, the only challenge with a webinar is that you can't do anything experiential. And so why don't we follow this up with a face-to-face workshop where we can invite everybody to go out and learn how to go bungee jumping. So how many of you, raise your hand if you would, if the red light went on for you? Raise your hand. Is that an idea that where you just kind of go, you must be kidding. I am never going to go bungee jumping. So any of you feel like that's something that's pretty crazy for you, that you would never, ever pursue bungee jumping? Okay, so some of you are saying, I don't think so. Okay, absolutely not. And how many of you, now if you would clear that for me, Helen, how many of you had the caution light on? It's like, well, maybe. I'm not so sure where she's going with this. Maybe she's kind of taking me down an interesting track. Okay, so that could be interesting. And then finally, I would love to see some, click on your applause button if the green light was on and you're going, yay, that sounds like something that's very interesting. I finally doing something that's pretty interesting and different. Yeah, absolutely, but only in a structured group. Yeah, so with some caveats perhaps, okay? So this is what's happening in our heads all of the time. And you are in control of this traffic signal. I know a guy, as soon as a certain person walks through the threshold of their office, the red light goes on, before the person's even opened their mouth. So I would like to invite you, when does the red light go on for you? Are there certain people, situations, ideas, processes, challenges that throw you into that red light zone? And what is it that happens when the red light's on? Well, we shut down our thinking. Okay, and I found that in dealing in this world of creativity, for many people, just saying the word creativity will turn the red light on for them. So I encourage you to think about when you are getting in your own way, because ultimately you are in control of this system called the brain. And you can choose to pay attention or to let that red light get in your way. And of course, some of us have more traffic signals than we can possibly handle. So, yes, and I'm hearing some of you say, well, gee, when somebody's in a mess, it has a really messy office, or when it's really, really high risk. Absolutely, you just find yourself having a really hard time. When certain people walk into your office, when people are really negative, maybe that's what it is. So I just jot down what those things are. Those are your biggest personal barriers to creative thinking. If it makes you uncomfortable, then chances are it's stretching your thinking. So you want to be looking for those opportunities for that sense of discomfort, because that means, maybe I have an opportunity. Maybe I could just pause that red light for just a moment. So let's take a look at you and your creative self. The blue quadrant tends to be more purposeful. The red is more people-oriented. The yellow is more possibilities-oriented. And the green more process-oriented. All have a role in creative thinking. So it's not just about the right brain being more creative. It's really about how do we all contribute to this. And so I'd like you to think, some of you may be problem finders, really, really good at uncovering problems, really interested in problems, liking to do the research and the analysis and doing that with a very clear purpose. And I found that, you can kind of have some fun with this. So those who've got that focus can often find themselves really interested in data. So you might see in an extreme case, they're saying, well, you know what, in God we trust, but all others must have data. Go ahead, you can laugh at this if this is true for you, because maybe some of you can actually relate to that need for data. On the other hand, not having that strong A preference, blue quadrant preference, may mean that you don't actually have a great way to describe what actually happens. Explain the manufacturing process a little. So maybe you know some people who struggle with that and they get stuck with it. Or maybe you're more of an implementer. You like organizing, capturing, making stuff happen, getting it done, planning. You're into the process. So here's an example of somebody who's very organized. Honestly, Ellen, you are so organized, and she has put Ed in his place. So you might laugh at this if this is a case for you. And those of us who are not organized, well, maybe we have a different way of capturing information. Hold on a second, Bob. I'm putting you on a sticky. So maybe that's more like you. Then there's your idea sensing self, into that interaction with people, sensing, going really into the touch and sort of wanting to engage in a strong way, and really kind of getting those ideas at a very sensory level. And I found that this has often got a strong people orientation. So a clue about that kind of person may be, as you look at their desk, they like to have lots of pictures about people that they care about around them. And maybe you've seen this desk either at home or at work before, so you can laugh at that. And then, of course, on the other hand, maybe you're not like that. And so you might say, well, I have no idea who they are. They came with the frames. Okay, last but not least, often attributed as being the creative self, our idea finding self. One aspect of creative thinking: holistic, playful, intuitive, visionary, experimental, really interested in starting things up in the possibilities. Often this part of who we are kind of gets lost in our own thinking. And so maybe you've seen this happen before. What is he doing? What is he doing? What is he doing? What is he doing? What in the heck am I doing? Maybe you can relate to that. So you can respond to that. Now, if you don't have preferences there, you might find that you may be a little less comfortable with this notion of going with the flow, so you might want a step-by-step approach to improvisation. So all of these are valid. Where are you? So let's open our second poll. Which quadrant is most appropriate for you as you think about your creative self? Is it A, B, C, or D? So let's open the poll if we can, Helen, and get people voting. Which one is most prevalent for you? Is it the problem finding self, blue purpose, idea implementing self, idea sensing self, or last but not least, our idea finding self? Okay, so we'll get a sense of what that looks like. Many of you are typing it in, A and D, so you have combos, A and B. Lots of you have combinations, okay? All right, and so we've got quite a bit of the A quadrant problem finding. We've got some of the idea implementing, not as much around the idea sensing, and then many of you who've also got that that idea finding self. Okay, thank you very much. So you see that we have a pretty broad representation here in the room. So part of what that means is the stuff that often may not feel comfortable for you is additive to your thinking. So let's do another quick mental floss here. So I don't know if any of you play cards. Let me just try this little magic trick with you and see what happens. So I'm going to have you pick a card and focus on it, and then I'm going to perform my magic trick. And what I'd like you to do, I'm going to put some cards up very briefly, and I want you to pick a card, and then briefly close your eyes and see if you can see it in your mind's eye. Okay? So pick a card, focus on it. Now close your eyes and see if you can see it. Okay? Now open your eyes, and I'm going to magically remove the card that you selected. Do you see your card? Raise your hand if your card is missing. Some of you are saying, absolutely, it's missing. No, I don't see it. Okay, so you can type it in. All right, so how did I do that? How did I do that? This is my little magic trick. What did I do? Yeah, well, yeah, I changed all the cards. Okay, so part of what happens is when we start to focus and we have that mindset and we have those preferences around what we pay attention to, it means we miss the rest of the picture. And so we'll often find ourselves maybe not seeing the other options. So that is part of what your preferences will do, is they may mean that you are so focused on one that you don't see the others. This is called unintentional blindness by some of the researchers who are out there. And maybe if you Google, there's a great little videotape out there that's called Basketball and Unintentional Blindness. And it's a great little experience. Check it out and see if you can, and you might learn something about yourself. So we use something to help us understand and do our research that's called the Herrmann Brain Dominance Profile, and it shows the degree of preference for everybody. So here's a page out of a planner organizer from a friend of mine in France, and it's got some clues on it as to how this person thinks, and here is their profile. And he works with another individual whose planner page looks like this. And of course, you see that that's got quite a bit of detail, and here is that person's profile. So we have access to all four of these. It's not like we only have one. And these two people look at the world in different ways. They solve problems in different ways. One will say, you know, I need to think of all the possibilities first versus I need to have everything organized before I can start thinking. Or we need to break down the problem to get to the best solution versus I like to get a feel for the situation and get others involved in the process. So here's some sample profiles of successful occupational categories. Where do you think engineers fall? Where do you think engineers fall? And typically, you're going to find engineers tend to be more frequently over here towards that A quadrant, and to a certain degree, more over, often it may combine the blue and the yellow or the blue and the green, okay? Least preferred is often going to be that red quadrant. Some folks, Ed and Monica Lumsdaine, who've done quite a bit of research working with engineering students. Each plot point on this graph represents a student, and you see the average of one of the groups of students that they work with. This is pretty typical. You see that it's mostly all up in that that A quadrant. Now, very interestingly enough, when you look at the entering freshmen, however, look at how much more distributed it is. And throughout the course of the curriculum that they're teaching, which is fascinating, we've seen that the highest GPAs are those profiles that are most closely aligned with the more technical curriculum. And their whole focus is looking at how do we get more creative as engineers. So I highly recommend their work. If you're interested, I'll make sure to put a reference in there in the deck I send out. They've been working with engineers for many, many years. Now, men and women are different. Quick comment on that, because it will help you as you look at getting difference. If you just have a gender difference, you will find that you have an opportunity for different thinking. Most preferred for males tends to be that blue. Least preferred the red. Most preferred for females is the red, not the blue. So we have an opportunity there for difference. The green and the yellow tend to be pretty constant between men and women. And we can have some fun with this. We sleep in separate rooms. We have dinner apart. We take separate vacations. We're doing everything we can to have our marriage together. So maybe you have a spouse or a partner or a girlfriend or a boyfriend, and they think differently. Or maybe they think similarly. I don't care if she's a tape dispenser. I love her. Okay? And those differences sometimes pop up in our personal lives. Great PowerPoint, Kevin. But the answer is no. Whenever I get mad at you, you never seem to get upset. How do you manage to control your temper? I just go and clean the toilet. How does that help? Well, I use your toothbrush. So we have some fun looking at that. But you'll find that bringing together men and women will automatically increase the creative output of a group. So when you're in a team, if you have a team challenge like this particular team does, sometimes you find that not everybody is really playing fair, sort of saying, let's all work together. I'm sure glad the hole's not in our end, says this person. It's kind of ridiculous, isn't it? So when we look at teams, what we want to do is say, okay, you can go in with this attitude. Together, everyone annoys me. If you would, just type in a Y or raise your hand if you work on a team. Do you work on a team? How many of you actually are working on teams, have access to teams? It's part of your day-to-day lives. Okay, somewhat. Okay, so that's part of what you do. So when we look at teams, you have a great opportunity. When you have homogeneous profiles, you will find that there's very similar thinking. And sometimes that's what you want. When you bring together a group, you'll find, as this says, the only trouble is when one burns out, they all burn out. You've got similar thinking. And that means that you're going to limit the prospects of what you can get in terms of creative output. When you bring together a heterogeneous group, that could be different functions, male, female, different ages, any kind of heterogeneity is good. You will find that, in fact, you can have significantly greater creative output than unbalanced or homogeneous groups. And we have found that whole brain teams can be 66% more effective. We've got a great case study from the U.S. Forest Service that talks to that. There are some caveats, so if you're interested in learning more about that, no more than 7 members, and you want at least one whole brain thinker on the team. So, what do you think? Do you think that we talk faster than we think? Raise your hand if you think we talk faster than we think. What do you think? Do we talk faster than we think? What do you think? Interestingly enough, we actually talk at about a rate of 125 to 175 words a minute, while we can listen and think at a rate of up to 450 to 600 words per minute. So one of the challenges when we're working with other people and we're trying to come up with solutions is that we are thinking, and maybe you've noticed this, while they are talking. You don't have to confess, but I'm sure that it's happening. In fact, maybe it's even happening right this moment with me. So as you engage in the creative thinking process and you engage others in that process and you try to get others helping you, you need to also turn off your own thinking to be able to hear some of that. So here's some quick tools that you can use. They're all very self-explanatory. We found that the creative thinking process hits all 4 quadrants. You need to be thinking, feeling, playing, and acting. All 4 are critical. And it really moves across the 4 quadrants continuously. Okay, so it's not an either or, it's not just one. And here are some quick tools that you can use. One of the things that happens is that we get mentally stuck in our thinking. So here's another quick example of some brain aerobics. Just very quickly, I want you to sketch this figure onto your pad and see if you can divide it into 5 equal areas. I put an example up there of the figure divided into 4 equal areas. So you're all engineers, I bet you're going to be really good at this. So quickly divide it into 5 equal areas. I'm sure you can knock this out in 10 seconds. How would you solve this problem? Raise your hand when you're done, so you have an idea. Or you can always type in yes if you'd like. Okay, I've got one person already who's kind of finding a solution there. All right, okay, got another. Okay, here they come. All right, let's take a quick look at what a possible solution might be. Here's a possible solution. Now, what did I do by showing you the example to the right? I set up your thinking to think in a certain way, and I probably made it harder for you to solve the problem. So you've got to make sure that you pay attention to the assumptions that you're heading into the problem with and clearly define what you're working on. A very simple way to do that is to just ask it in this way. How to, that H2 stands for how to blank in order to blank. And you will probably have 10 problem statements for every single situation that you're working on. The biggest challenge I've seen in people working on problems and trying to get creative is that they're working on the wrong problem or they haven't correctly defined the problem. A big piece of the solution is actually in the problem definition. So don't shortcut that. Very important. And in many instances, you'll be working with somebody else and they've defined the problem differently than you. Create as many how-to statements as you can. You'll have this as part of your handout so you can use it. You want to use your senses. You need to get in touch with your intuition. Pay attention to those ideas when you're running. Pay attention to what you're sensing. Go to your gut. Ask yourself questions. What's it feel like? This is going to be the greatest challenge for this group in terms of many of you said this was not your most preferred quadrant. So that may mean quieting your mind so that you can listen to it and hear what it has to say. And sometimes we, have other people making it hard for us to do that. It's always sit, stay, heal, never think, innovate, be yourself. So, we all have examples of idea killers. I had somebody say to me the other day, believe it or not, God, Ann, that is a stupid idea. So maybe you've had examples of people who've just shot your idea down. All right, so you have to quiet that and really not pay attention to that so that you can get in touch with that sensing. Yeah, we've tried that before. Oh man, the unions are going to scream. There's no way we can afford it. So don't be ridiculous. It costs too much. Oh, you're not the one deciding on this. We'll be the laughing stock. It isn't in the budget. Okay. So you got to pay attention to that and not overlook it. And of course, not all of us have a vice president in charge of enthusiasm, but your job may need to be that you are enthusiastic about an idea, even if you still don't get it, even if it's your own idea, and and just kind of give yourself a break when you come up with it. And then of course we want to have some fun with this, play around with it, ask yourself ask yourself if you had a magic wand and you had no constraints, what would the solution look like? And some years ago, we worked with a group that had a problem in a plant. People were wrapping the product in paper, and they were reading the paper. It was slowing down the line. So we said, what can we do? A crazy idea was we could poke their eyes out. And a great way to deal with some of those crazy ideas is to do a TLC. What's tempting about that? Well, what's tempting about it is that it solves the problem. It kind of deals with the issue. What's lacking? How about that it's immoral, that it's illegal, that it's a mess? And then what you can change about it, well, what they changed about it is they came up with the idea of actually hiring the blind. You could also use foreign language newspaper. You could turn down the lights. So when you come up with a crazy idea, all you need to do is TLC it. So use all of these different kinds of tools. They're very simple. You could just pull out this handout and refer to them, and you will find that you can really expand your thinking significantly, either working by yourself or working with somebody else. You want to use all 4 quadrants of the whole brain model. Then if you're not sure that you're using them, you can use this little checklist to go through and say, have I really covered all my bases? Am I looking at this logically? Am I really thinking about it? Am I, looking at, is it doable? Have I really connected with other people? Do I understand my customer? Or is this truly imaginative, visionary, forward-looking? So those are some of the tools that you've got. Problem definition, looking at how you can sense and pay attention to your ideas, coming up with magic wand ideas, and if they're a little bit crazy, then using the TLC model to actually say what's tempting, what's lacking, and what can I change. So as we look at that, here's a few quick recommendations, and then I'll take any of the questions that you've got. Accept more of your own creative potential. You have to start there. This is the place you need to start. We've all got it, but you've got to accept it. Discover what your preferred thinking styles are and what your most effective creative process is. Pay attention. Try some new things. There's lots of research out there. There are books, there's tools, there's websites. Take advantage of your most creative thinking time in the day or night. And of course, find effective ways to capture those ideas. Don't ignore them or overlook them. Go ahead with your ideas, but be prepared to stop if necessary. So don't have the red line on right away, but be prepared to stop if it does get risky, and be willing to take your ideas as far as they could go. Sometimes I think we stop too soon. As we look at what those risks may be, recognize that mistakes are going to occur. You're going to have to learn from them and accept them. Find as many applications as you can. to reach for each of those ideas. And sometimes I think we may stop at the idea process and say, well, wait a minute, we wouldn't have Post-it notes if we hadn't thought about a new application for those little sticky notes that were initially, really not sticky enough to serve the original purpose and work to mark pages in the hymnal at church. So we wouldn't have Post-it notes if we hadn't found new applications. Have the courage to fall through in order to make it happen. This can be tough for those people who don't like implementing. It can be really a challenge. Be persistent with yourself, but be patient with others. Learn to listen to the things that you think red light as really kind of crazy, and just bear with it. Take a deep breath. Have a positive image of the value and worth of your ideas as well as those of others, and be ready to cope with failure if need be, but always, always plan for success. So, for best results used daily, what questions do you have? I've given you a very brief overview of what the brain does and doesn't, the patterns that we challenge, the faces that we face when we've got our own perceptions and preferences. As Woodrow Wilson said, I use not only all the brains I have, but all that I can borrow. So what are you going to do as a result of what we've talked about today? That's one thing that you can do differently. Just one. Type it into chat. What can you do differently as a result of what we've done today? Or if you have a question, go ahead and type that into chat if you would. What's one thing that you can do as a result of what we're doing today? Anything that you can do differently? Take a moment to just type that in. Let's see. You might get an idea. How would this compare to the Myers-Briggs? Myers-Briggs is looking at personality, and it's from a psychological perspective. This is a brain-based model, so it's looking at it from a thinking perspective. So there is some overlap, but as my dad was a physicist, he really wanted to understand the brain and the thinking components. So we're really looking at thinking. So there is some correlation. Write down ideas no matter how minimal they seem. That's a great thing to do because I think it does make a difference. And how you really need to pay attention. You don't always have the time to evaluate an idea when you're processing it, and too often we jump too quickly. Set aside a time for creative thinking every day. All it takes is 5 minutes to just step aside, look out a window, take a 3-minute walk. Make an effort to tap into all 4 quadrants. Even if you don't have access to a team or others, you can mentally make that leap. Our data and experience has shown that everybody can do that. And it's not that hard. It can only take a few minutes. You don't have to live there for the rest of your life. You might find that you actually enjoy it. Rapid prototyping is a great way to do that. And making sure that you're, fail fast, fail cheap, my friend Doug Hall likes to say. And that's an important thing to do. Let yourself move forward, rapid prototype, see if it works, move on to the next thing, not get too hung up on making it perfect. Often those of us with a blue preference, we're really wanting to make it perfect and we don't move quickly enough through our prototypes. Bounce ideas off of others more. You'll find that that can actually be a great platform. And a great way to do that if you're with a group of introverts is to do brain writing, where everybody's writing down their ideas and passing them around. It can be a very different process than our typical brainstorming, but a lot of people are kind of get shut down by brainstorming. So try brain writing, where you're in a group and everybody just writes down their ideas and passes them around and builds off of them. It's an interesting way to do that. And just be more active. Get out and exercise, and then take a device to capture your ideas. I think you'll find that it will significantly improve the quality and the number of ideas that you have available. Well, that takes us to the end of our time today. Thank you so much for your willingness to engage with me and our time. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to contact me, Ann@hbdi.com. And I'm on LinkedIn. I'm at Ann Herman. Twitter, you can follow me at Ann Herman. We've got a Whole Brain blog. And of course, we'll send out a deck with all of these resources for you and make that available. And go forth and be creative. Enjoy. Thank you so much for your time today, folks.